The central spire of High Terra was a monument to unity that felt more like a cage of glass and durasteel. From the 82nd floor of the Galactic Council Annex, the city below looked like a sprawling circuit board of light and motion, a testament to human engineering and interstellar commerce. But inside the Drakari delegation suite, the air was heavy with the scent of burning ozone and the ancient, musky aroma of stressed predators. Lyra Veyron stood by the panoramic window, her reflection ghosting over the city lights. She was undeniably striking, a creature of high evolution and ruthless aesthetics. Her skin was a pale alabaster human shade, but along her jawline, down her neck, and vanishing beneath the collar of her silk-heavy coat. Iridescent scales shimmered like crushed opals. Her eyes were vertical slits of molten gold, currently narrowed in a migraine-induced squint. She was the high diplomat of House Veyron, a tactical genius, and the scion of a species that could once boil oceans with their breath. Right now, however, she just felt tired. Behind her, the holographic display of the council docket was bleeding red ink. The situation is becoming untenable. Lyra, said Councillor Sereth. He was an older Drakari, his scales dull and graying at the edges, his tail twitching with nervous energy where it coiled by his feet. We lost the motion on the Isvarian mining rights this morning. That is the third territory strip-mined by human corporations in a month. And the raiders on the frontier colonies? They are getting bolder. They hit a supply depot in the Kalen sector yesterday. 12 dead. Lyra did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the traffic streams below. Who were they? Unknown, Sereth replied, his voice grating like stone on stone. No transponder codes, military-grade tactics. They strike, they vanish, and the council shrugs and calls it pirate activity. We are being bled dry. Lyra, our votes are being bought or blocked. The Drakari influence is practically a myth at this point. Lyra turned then, her movements fluid and dangerously sharp. She walked to the central table, her boots making no sound on the polished floor. It is a blockade in everything but name. Sereth. Someone wants us desperate. We are desperate, he snapped, which is why the proposal from the Western Human Bloc is our only option. Lyra looked at the document he slid across the table. It was a marriage proposal, or rather, a merger disguised as a wedding invitation. Senator Vance of the Terra Centauri Coalition, a man with a smile like a shark and a legislative record that treated alien species as taxable livestock. Marrying Vance would secure trade protection, Sereth argued, his tone pleading. It would soften our image. Humans love a romance. It makes us look less predatory. It makes us look domesticated, Lyra corrected, her voice low and cold. Vance does not want a wife, Sereth. He wants a trophy. He wants to parade a dragon girl around the gala circuit to show his constituents that the scary monsters have been tamed. It is better to be a trophy than a corpse. Sereth slammed his hand on the table. If we do not secure an alliance within the week, the Council will vote to reallocate our outer sector defenses to the Aurelian Syndicate. We will be defenseless. Lyra looked at the proposal again. The sheer arrogance of it made the smoke rise in her throat, a biological reflex of her ancestors she had spent years suppressing. If she married Vance, she would be bound by human marital laws. Her assets merged. Her voice in the council filtered through his approval. It was not a marriage. It was a liquidation of assets. I will not marry Senator Vance, Lyra said. Then we are finished, Sereth hissed. No, Lyra said, a dangerous idea crystallizing in her mind. It was reckless, it was humiliating, and it was brilliant. We need a human alliance, We need the legal protections of a cross-species union to bypass the trade blockades. But I will not be given away like a prize heifer at a county fair. If I must play this game, I will control the board. She tapped a sequence into the console, pulling up a different database. It was the Interstellar Civil Registry, specifically the section dedicated to contractual spousal acquisitions. It was a gray market, legal but looked down upon, used mostly by eccentric trillionaires or desperate politicos. "What are you doing?" Sareth asked. Horrified. "I am sourcing an alternative," Lyra said, her gold eyes scanning the data streams. "I do not need a senator who thinks he owns me. I need a partner who understands the value of a contract. I need a human who is invisible, competent, and purchasable." She stopped scrolling. Her finger hovered over a file. The image showed a man with dark hair, tired eyes, and a jawline that suggested he had taken a few punches in his life. His resume was a labyrinth of redacted military logistics and freelance consulting. He was nobody, and that made him perfect. Lyra looked at Sareth, her chin lifted in a line of imperial defiance. "I will not be sold, counselor. I will pay for a human spouse because this is more than just a simple deal." Ethan Cole sat in the back of a noodle bar in Sector 4, watching the rain streak the neon-lit window. The broth in front of him was lukewarm, but he was not really there for the food. He was there because the encryption key on his data pad had finally unlocked the file he had stolen 6 months ago, and the contents were enough to get him killed 3 times over. He was 34 years old, though his joints felt 50. He had spent 10 years in the Planetary Logistics Corps, moving crates of ammunition and medical supplies to wars the government pretended were not happening. When he had left, he had taken nothing but a severance check and a hard drive he found in a trash heap, a drive that turned out to contain the shipping manifests for a black budget operation that technically did not exist. Ethan tapped the screen. The manifests showed heavy shipments of biogenetic equipment moving to coordinates that were supposed to be empty space. The sender was obscured, but the logistics signature had the fingerprints of the Aurelian Syndicate all over it. He needed a place to hide. He needed a wall thick enough to stop a railgun round, or a shadow dark enough to vanish into. His bank account was draining faster than a hull breach, and his contacts had all gone silent. His data pad chimed, a priority message, not a bounty hunter, not a creditor, a law firm, Veyron Associates. Ethan frowned. He knew the name. Everyone knew the name. The Drakari were the stuff of vid-screen legends, tall, beautiful, terrifying dragon people who wore silk and spoke in riddles. Why would a Drakari house be messaging a washing-up logistics contractor? He opened the message. It was not a cease and desist. It was an invitation to a private interview. The subject line was blunt. Contractual opportunity. High risk. High reward. Discretion absolute. Ethan looked at the file on his screen, then at the invitation. If the syndicate knew what he had, he was dead in a week. If he walked into the Drakari embassy, he was stepping into a political minefield. But minefields had one advantage. Nobody followed you into them unless they were crazy. He finished his broth, threw a credit chip on the table, and stood up. He adjusted his jacket, feeling the weight of the data drive in his inner pocket. "Time to see what the dragons want," he muttered. The conference room in the Drakari embassy was designed to intimidate. The ceiling was 30 feet high, lost in shadows, and the temperature was kept at a humid 30 degrees Celsius. Ethan stood at the end of a long table made of black obsidian, feeling underdressed in his synthetic wool jacket and tactical trousers. The door at the far end slid open, and Lyra Veyron walked in. Ethan had seen pictures of her on the news feeds. But the resolution did not do justice to the sheer presence of her. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet, moving with a predatory grace that made human walking look like stumbling. The scales on her neck caught the ambient light, flashing emerald and gold. She did not offer a hand. She sat at the head of the table and gestured for him to take the seat opposite. "Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice was a low contralto, vibrating slightly in a way that he could feel in his chest. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Ethan sat, keeping his posture relaxed but ready. "Your message was intriguing. Lady Veyron, usually when I get messages that vague, they involve smuggling contraband or cleaning up a chemical spill. This is a cleanup operation of a sort," Lyra said, tapping her claws lightly on the obsidian. "I have reviewed your file. Logistics analyst, honorable discharge, freelance contractor for high-risk supply chains. You are known for being efficient, discreet, and entirely unconcerned with public opinion." "I like to keep my head down," Ethan said. "It stays attached longer that way." "Precisely," Lyra said. "I am in need of a specific set of skills and a specific legal status." Ethan waited. He was good at waiting. "I require a spouse, Mr. Cole." Ethan blinked. He kept his face neutral, but his mind did a quick reboot. "Excuse me?" "I require a human spouse," Lyra repeated, as if she were ordering a starship part. "A political necessity has arisen. I need to bypass certain trade restrictions that are strangling my people. A marriage to a human citizen grants me immediate dual entity status under the Galactic Trade Accords. It also protects me from other political entanglements." Ethan leaned back, studying her. She was perfectly composed, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her pupils contracted slightly. She was cornered. "So, you are shopping," Ethan said dryly. "And I am on the shelf." "You are available," Lyra corrected. "And you are desperate." "Do not look at me with feigned offense, Mr. Cole. I know you have inquiries regarding your credit standing. I know you have moved 3 times in the last month. You are running from something." Ethan went still. "She was good." "I am offering you a shelter," Lyra continued. "A 5-year contract. You will live in the embassy or my private estate. All your debts will be paid. You will receive a stipend of 200,000 credits annually. In exchange, you will be my husband in public. You will attend functions, sign documents, and present a united front." "And in private?" Ethan asked. "In private, you will leave me alone," Lyra said sharply. "This is a business transaction. There will be no intimacy. No forced cohabitation in personal quarters. We are allies. Nothing more." Ethan looked at the table. It was insane. It was the kind of thing that ended with him being a punchline on a late-night comedy hologram. But it was also the perfect cover. Who would look for a whistleblower in the bed of a Drakari diplomat? He looked up at her. 5 years, 200,000 a year, and full access to Drakari security protocols for my personal safety, Ethan added. Lyra narrowed her eyes. "Acceptable. And an exit clause," he said. "If the heat gets too high, for either of us, we can dissolve the contract without penalty." "Agreed," Lyra said. She pressed a button, and a holographic contract materialized between them. It was thick, dense with legal jargon. Ethan scrolled through it, his eyes scanning for traps. He had read military supply contracts designed to screw over entire planets. He knew what to look for. Mutual consent, no consummation required, joint asset protection. It looked standard, cold, and transactional. Then he stopped at the bottom of page 15. "Wait," Ethan said. "What is this? Clause 84B? Lyra stiffened slightly. That is a non-negotiable term. Ethan read it aloud. The primary party, Veyron, agrees to extend full diplomatic sanctuary and legal advocacy to all human contracted workers currently employed by Veyron's subsidiary mining corporations, granting them refugee status within the Drakari embassy. He looked up at her, genuinely surprised. You are using your own sham marriage to legalize a refugee shelter? Lyra's expression cracked, just for a second, revealing a flash of fierce defensive pride. The corporations operating on the fringe, they exploit loopholes. My people's name is on the buildings, but human overseers run the shifts. They treat the workers like ore. I cannot fire the corporations without a council vote, but as a human spouse, I can extend family-adjacent protections to the workers. Ethan stared at her. He had expected a dragon lady, a cold-blooded politician. He had not expected this. She was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the council, and one to save people who probably hated her. She was not just buying a husband, she was buying a shield for the helpless. Ethan reached for the stylus. You are not what they say on the news. Lady Veyron, Ethan said quietly. And you are not as dull as your resume suggests. Mr. Cole, she replied. He signed his name in the air. The hologram flashed gold. Call me Ethan, he said. If we are going to be married, you should probably stop calling me Mr. Cole. Lyra looked at the signature, then up at him. The exhaustion in her eyes seemed to lift, replaced by a steely resolve. Very well. Ethan, welcome to the family. Try not to get eaten. The Galactic Unity Gala was the sort of event where the hors d'oeuvres cost more than a starship engine and the conversation was cheaper than dirt. The grand ballroom of the orbital station was a swirling mass of velvet, silk, and chitin. Dignitaries from a dozen systems mingled under a domed ceiling that projected a real-time view of the local nebula. When Lyra and Ethan walked in, the room did not just go quiet, it went vacuum silent. Ethan wore a tailored midnight blue suit that Lyra's tailors had constructed in under 3 hours. It fit him like a second skin, hiding the holster under his left arm. Lyra was breathtaking. She wore a gown of liquid silver that left her back exposed, showcasing the ridge of crystalline spines that ran down her spine. Her arm was looped through Ethan's, her claws resting gently but possessively on his sleeve. The whispers started like a hiss of steam. Is that him? She bought him, you know. Disgraceful. I give it a month. Ethan kept his head high, a small, amused smile playing on his lips. Keep smiling, he murmured, barely moving his lips. I think the ambassador from Krill is trying to decide if I look delicious or just expensive. He thinks you look like a garnish, Lyra murmured back, her face a mask of serene diplomacy. Do not stare at his mandibles. It is considered a proposition. They moved through the crowd, a shark cutting through a school of fish. Lyra introduced him to dukes, admirals, and trade barons. Ethan played the part perfectly, polite, deferential, but with a quiet confidence that confused the critics. He didn't look like a pet. He looked like a bodyguard who happened to be wearing a wedding ring. Then came Senator Holloway. The senator was a large man with a flushed face and a voice that carried across 3 time zones. He intercepted them near the champagne fountain, flanked by a gaggle of reporters. Lady Veyron, Holloway boomed, spreading his arms. And this must be the lucky groom. Senator, Lyra said, dipping her head slightly. May I introduce my husband, Ethan Cole. Holloway looked Ethan up and down with a sneer he barely bothered to hide. A pleasure, son, truly. It is a brave thing. Crossing the species line, very progressive. Tell me, Lady Veyron, How is the Vaktura adjusting to having a mammal in the house? The room tensed. Vaktura was a slur. It was a bastardization of the Drakari word for nest servant. Ethan felt Lyra's arm tighten on his, her claws digging in slightly. He stepped forward, ready to interject, but Lyra beat him to it. Her voice was soft, melodic, and cut through the noise like a diamond drill. "I believe you mean Valcora, Senator," Lyra said, her tone dripping with polite education, which means honored partner. Vaktura is the word we use for the cleaning drones that scrub the waste from our latrines. An easy mistake to make, I am sure, given the phonetic similarities. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Holloway turned a shade of purple usually reserved for dying stars. Lyra smiled at him, showing just a hint of her serrated teeth. "But to answer your question, my husband is adjusting beautifully. He has excellent manners, something that seems to be in short supply this evening." She steered Ethan away before the senator could recover. "That was brutal," Ethan whispered as they moved toward the transit corridor. "It was necessary," Lyra replied, though her hand was trembling slightly against his arm. "They will test for weakness. If I show any, they will tear us apart." They reached the transit corridor, a long, transparent tube that hovered magnetically between the ballroom sector and the residential towers. It was empty. The lights dimmed for the evening view. "We should get back," Lyra said, letting out a long breath. "My facial muscles are cramping from all this fake smiling." "You are doing great," Ethan said. "I think you actually scared the reporter from the Daily Star." The world tilted. There was no sound of an explosion, just a sickening lurch as the gravity stabilizers in the corridor floor sheared off. The floor dropped away. Lyra stumbled, her heels skidding on the tilting glass. The safety field flickered and died. She slid toward the edge, where the glass panel had cracked open to the 1,000-foot drop below. Lyra. Ethan didn't think. He didn't calculate. He moved with the explosive speed of a man who had spent 10 years dodging falling crates and mortar fire. He lunged across the sliding floor, grabbing Lyra by the waist just as she went over the lip of the breach. His boots scrabbled for purchase on the smooth surface. He slammed his other hand onto a support stanchion, his fingers locking around the metal. They swung there, suspended over the abyss of the city. Lyra dangled from his arm, her eyes wide with shock. For the first time, the mask was gone. She looked terrified. "Hold on," Ethan gritted out, his shoulder screaming in protest as it took her full weight, which was heavier than a human's due to her bone density. "I've got you." Lyra looked up at him. She saw the strain in his face, the corded muscle of his neck, the sheer, stubborn refusal to let go. In her world, weakness was death. In her world, when you slipped, you fell. But he was holding her. Ethan hauled them up, groaning with the effort, dragging them both back onto the stable section of the corridor. They collapsed onto the floor in a heap of silk and suit fabric. Lyra lay on top of him, her chest heaving. Her scales were rough against his cheek, warm and electric. They were tangled together, breathing hard, the adrenaline flooding their systems. Ethan looked up at her. Her golden eyes were blown wide, the pupils round. They were inches apart. He could smell the ozone scent of her fear and the jasmine perfume she wore. "Are you?" Ethan gasped. "Are you okay?" Lyra stared at him. She had hired a logistical asset. She had hired a paper shield. She had not hired a man who would throw himself into a gravity well to catch her. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was uncharacteristically shaky. For a moment, neither of them moved. The professional distance, the contract, the no intimacy clause, it all evaporated in the heat of near death. There was a spark there, A dangerous, confusing magnetic pull that had nothing to do with politics. Then the security alarms began to wail. Lyra scrambled off him, regaining her composure with a visible effort. She smoothed her dress, her face hardening back into the diplomat's mask. "That was not an accident," she said, her voice turning to ice. Ethan sat up, rubbing his shoulder. "No. The stabilizers were cut. I saw the sparks before we fell." He stood and offered her a hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her skin was cool, his was hot. "We need to move," Ethan said. "Now." Back in the safety of Lyra's private office, the mood was grim. Ethan was scanning the security logs on a terminal while Lyra paced, her tail sweeping angrily behind her. "It was a warning," Lyra said. "They want me to know that nowhere is safe. Or they want you dead," Ethan said without looking up. "But they missed, which means they were sloppy, or they were rushed." He typed a command string, bypassing the standard embassy firewalls. He was using his own algorithms now, the ones he used to track ghost shipments. "I am checking the registry," Ethan said. "If they sabotaged the corridor, they might have tried to sabotage the paperwork too. If our marriage isn't registered correctly, your diplomatic immunity doesn't cover me, and it doesn't cover the refugees." He hit enter. The screen flashed red. Ethan swore softly. "What is it?" Lyra was at his side in an instant. "Look," Ethan pointed. "The timestamp on our marriage certificate. It's been altered." Lyra looked. The digital seal was there, but the date had been pushed forward by 24 hours. "According to this," Ethan said, his voice grim, "we aren't married yet. The ceremony is recorded for tomorrow." "Which means," Lyra whispered, realization dawning with horror, "that when we appeared at the gala tonight, we were committing fraud, a deception of the council." "It is avoidable offense," Ethan said. "They can annul the contract before it even starts. They can arrest you for treasonous misrepresentation, and they can deport me." Lyra looked at the screen, then at Ethan. The trap had been sprung. They had walked right into it. "Someone tampered with the central registry," Lyra said. "That is impossible. The encryption is Drakari grade." "Unless," Ethan said, tapping the screen, "the call is coming from inside the house." He pulled up the access log. The modification had been authorized by a terminal within the Drakari embassy. Lyra went pale. It wasn't the humans. It wasn't the syndicate. "We are not just fighting the council," she said, her voice barely audible. "We are being hunted by my own people." Ethan stood up, the pain in his shoulder forgotten. He looked at the dragon girl who had bought him, and he realized the deal had just changed. He wasn't just a husband anymore. He was an accomplice. "Fix it," Lyra said, turning to him. Her eyes were burning with a terrifying light. "Can you fix it?" Ethan cracked his knuckles. "I can do better than fix it. Lyra, I can track it." He began to type, fast and hard. "Welcome to the marriage," Ethan muttered. "Hope you survive the honeymoon." The glow of the terminal cast a harsh, artificial blue light over Ethan's face as his fingers flew across the haptic interface. The Drakari embassy was asleep, or as asleep as a fortress ever truly was. But the air inside Lyra's private office vibrated with tension. Lyra stood behind him, her arms crossed, the shimmering scales along her forearms bristling, a physiological betrayal of her composure. She watched the human work, expecting him to be fumbling with the alien architecture of the Drakari operating system. Instead, he was tearing through layers of encryption like he was peeling fruit. "You are bypassing the security nodes," Lyra noted, her voice low. "That should trigger a lockdown." "It would if I were attacking it," Ethan said without looking up. But I am not attacking. I am asking the system nicely to show me who touched it last. See here? He pointed to a stream of data cascading down the screen. The registry timestamp was not altered from the outside. Ethan explained. It was a localized injection. Someone with physical access to a terminal on the secure network inserted the delay code. They wanted the marriage to look fraudulent the moment we stepped onto that gala floor. Lyra leaned in, the heat of her body radiating against his shoulder. A traitor within the embassy. Or a sloppy contractor, Ethan suggested, though his tone implied he did not believe it. But look at the routing signature. It bounces through 3 dummy servers before terminating at a secure node in the Western Wing. The Western Wing housing the traditionalist faction, Lyra said, her eyes narrowing into vertical slits. Counselor Sereth and his circle. They would rather see me destroyed than see our bloodline diluted by a human contract. Ethan sat back, exhaling a long breath. He rubbed his eyes. So we have human supremacists wanting to kill us for being an abomination, and Drakari purists wanting to frame us for treason. It is a crowded room of people who hate us. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time since the adrenaline of the corridor collapse had faded. He was tired, his human skin pale under the lights. But his mind was a razor. You are not just a logistics analyst, are you? Lyra asked quietly. You navigate these networks like a spider walking on its own web. I told you, Ethan said, turning his chair to face her. I specialize in moving things that people do not want moved, and finding things people want hidden. Logistics is just a polite word for knowing how the galaxy actually works. Lyra felt a strange sensation in her chest, a loosening of the tight coil of anxiety she had carried for months. She had bought a shield, but she had acquired a sword. We have a problem, Lyra said, straightening up and regaining her diplomatic armor. Even if we prove the registry was tampered with, the doubt has been sown. The council vote on the frontier defenses is in 2 days. We need to secure the swing votes at the High Steward's reception tonight. Another party? Ethan asked dryly. I am still recovering from the last one. This is not a party. Ethan, it is a battlefield with hors d'oeuvres. And we must appear undeniable. We must look like a union that cannot be broken by paperwork or gravity sabotage. She gestured toward the door. Come. If we are to survive tonight, you need to look the part. And unfortunately, that means we must visit the tailors again. The preparation chamber was a cavernous room filled with mirrors and floating distinct wardrobes. Lyra's personal attendants, silent and efficient, had laid out the ceremonial garb required for a High Steward's reception. Ethan stood in the center of the room, staring at the garment in his hands. It was a high-collared tunic of deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that hurt the eyes if one looked too closely. But it was the accessory on the table that concerned him. It was a heavy, ornate clasp made of platinum and obsidian, designed to secure a long, heavy cloak. However, the structure of it was clearly meant to sit at the base of the spine, accommodating a tail that Ethan definitively did not have. You cannot be serious, Ethan said. It is tradition, Lyra said from behind a privacy screen where she was changing. The sash must be weighted properly. That clasp represents the burden of leadership. It represents a tail. Lyra, Ethan called back. I am going to look like a respectable space peacock that lost its feathers. A soft, melodic sound echoed from behind the screen. It was a laugh. It was short, startled, and sounded like wind chimes caught in a storm. Ethan paused. He had never heard her laugh before. It transformed her from a terrifying alien diplomat into something startlingly present. Lyra stepped out. She was wearing a gown of dark, iridescent mesh that looked like dragon-scale armor spun into silk. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp, elegant lines of her face and the sweeping curve of her horns. "You will look distinguished," she said, though a hint of amusement lingered in her golden eyes. "And if anyone asks, tell them the tale is metaphysical." Ethan fastened the clasp, feeling the weight of it settle against his lower back. He looked in the mirror. He looked ridiculous, and yet, standing next to her, he looked like he belonged. "We have an hour before the transport arrives," Lyra said, her amusement fading into seriousness. "There is something I need to show you. Since you are so adept at finding lost things, perhaps you can help me understand what I am looking at." She led him out of the preparation suites and down a service lift that required a retinal scan and a breath sample to access. The lift descended deep into the bedrock of the embassy, far below the diplomatic levels. When the doors opened, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and old dust. "The archives," Lyra said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "This is where we keep the history that the Galactic Council prefers to forget." The room was a cathedral of data cores and physical artifacts. Floating stasis fields held shards of metal, ancient navigational spheres, and biological samples. Lyra walked past them to a section that looked like it had been ransacked. Empty pedestals stood like broken teeth in a smile. "These contained relic tech from the Great Migration," Lyra explained, running a hand over an empty display case. "The technology our ancestors used to cross the void before we had warp drives. Inertial dampeners, biological stasis pods, terraforming seeds." She tapped a console. According to the inventory logs, these items were transferred to a secure storage facility on the moon of Ethelgard 4 months ago. Authorized by the Quartermaster General. "And?" Ethan asked, stepping closer to inspect the falsified digital signature. "And the Quartermaster General died 2 years ago," Lyra said grimly. Ethan looked at the empty cases. He pulled out his datapad, a piece of cheap human tech that looked out of place in this hall of wonders, and scanned the residual energy signatures on the pedestals. "This wasn't a transfer," Ethan said. "It was a looting." He scrolled through the data he was pulling. "The inventory codes were swapped," he muttered. "They replaced the ID tags of the high-tech relics with codes for waste disposal units. The system thinks you threw out trash. Whoever did this understands supply chain obfuscation. This is professional laundering." He looked up at Lyra. "Why steal ancient tech? Is it valuable? To a collector?" "Yes," Lyra said. "But some of these devices—" "The biostasis pods, specifically. They were designed to interact with Drakari physiology at a genetic level. They were used to keep our ancestors alive during centuries of sleep. In the wrong hands, they could be reverse-engineered to deconstruct us." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Genetic weapons. He connected his pad to the main console. "Let me run a cross-reference on the transport manifest that picked up the trash." The screen flickered, processing the request. A name popped up, buried deep in the shell company structure. Aurelian Syndicate. Ethan stared at the name. The same group linked to the secret file he was hiding in his jacket pocket. The same group pushing for the defense contracts. "They are not just stripping your mining rights," Ethan said, his voice hard. "They are stripping your history, and maybe your biology." Lyra's hand clenched into a fist, her claws digging into her palm. "We have to go. The reception starts in 30 minutes. If the Syndicate is behind this, then every smile I see tonight could be hiding a knife." The High Steward's reception was held in the hanging gardens of the orbital spire. a place of breathtaking beauty where gravity was manipulated to allow waterfalls to flow upward. It was a display of excess that made Ethan's teeth ache. The moment they walked in, the atmosphere shifted. The gossip from the previous night's gala had mutated. The rumors of the registry tampering had leaked. As Lyra predicted, eyes followed them, human eyes full of judgment, Drakari eyes full of disdain. Lyra held her head high, her hand resting on Ethan's arm. But Ethan could feel the micro tremors in her muscles. She was terrified, not for herself, but for the humiliation of her house. Ethan leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear. "Breathe," he whispered. "You are the terrifying dragon lady. I am the gold-digging human. Let's give them a show." Lyra glanced at him, startled by his proximity, then gave a microscopic nod. She slowed her pace, forcing the room to wait for them. They navigated the shark tank. A Tellurian ambassador made a snide comment about mongrel alliances. Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, as they stopped to speak to a wavering voter, he placed his hand on the small of Lyra's back. It was a breach of protocol. It was intimate. It was possessive. Lyra froze for a fraction of a second, then leaned into the touch. It was grounding. A warm anchor in a room of cold shoulders. "Counselor," Lyra said to the voter, her voice softer than usual, lacking its typical metallic edge. "May I present my husband, Ethan? He has been helping me understand the complexities of cross-species infrastructure." The voter, a Skrellian with 4 eyes, looked from Lyra to Ethan. He saw the hand on her back. He saw the way Lyra's body angled toward the human. Not away. "It seems the rumors of a political sham are exaggerated." The Skrellian clicked. "You seem quite aligned." "We are navigating the differences," Ethan said with a charming, self-deprecating smile. "I am teaching her about sarcasm. She is teaching me that I am usually wrong. It is a balanced exchange." Lyra let out a genuine chuckle, surprising herself in the Skrellian. The tension in the immediate circle broke. "We should toast," the Skrellian said, signaling a server drone. 2 alliances. The drone hovered over, carrying a tray of iridescent flutes filled with nectar, a highly potent Drakari wine. Ethan reached for a glass, but Lyra's hand shot out, intercepting his wrist. Her movement was a blur, too fast for human eyes to track comfortably. "Wait," she said sharply. The circle went silent. Lyra leaned toward the tray. Her nostrils flared slightly. To a human, the wine smelled like spiced honey. To a Drakari, whose olfactory senses could detect pheromones across a crowded room, it smelled like honey and bitter almonds. "Cyanide derivative," Lyra murmured, almost to herself. "But modified, targeted." She looked at the server drone. It was a standard model, but its LED status light was pulsing a fraction of a second too fast. "My husband has a delicate constitution," Lyra announced loudly, her voice projecting to the nearby groups. "And this vintage has turned..." She took the glass intended for Ethan and held it up to the light. With her other hand, she twisted a ring on her finger, a piece of jewelry that was actually a micro-injector for field diplomacy. She slipped a tiny drop of clear liquid into the wine. The wine instantly turned a violent, churning black. It began to boil, dissolving the crystal glass. The bottom of the flute fell out, and the corrosive sludge splashed onto the floor, hissing as it ate through the carpet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "A bad year." "Indeed," Lyra said coolly, dropping the remains of the glass onto the drone's tray. Ethan stepped between her and the crowd, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket before he remembered he was unarmed. But his eyes scanned the room, mapping vectors. "Who?" he whispered. Lyra was scanning the balcony levels. There, the Aurelian Syndicate representative. A man in a gray suit was watching them from the upper tier, holding a glass of water. He raised it slightly in a mock salute, then turned and vanished into the crowd. Before they could react, a voice boomed across the garden. "Enough of this theater!" Counselor Sareth marched toward them, his tail lashing behind him, knocking over a pedestal of flowers. He was flanked by 2 Drakari guards. "You bring a poisoner's tricks to a peace summit." "Lyra," Sareth roared, "you make a mockery of our traditions, parading this purchased pet around, staging accidents to garner sympathy." The music stopped. The entire gala watched. "He is not a husband," Sareth spat, pointing a claw at Ethan. "He is a rental, a human shield you bought to hide your incompetence. You are shaming your bloodline, Veyron." Lyra opened her mouth to retort, her eyes glowing with suppressed rage. But Ethan stepped forward. He moved calmly, stepping out from behind her protection. He did not look like a soldier. He did not look like a spy. He looked like a man who was very tired of bullies. "Counselor Sareth," Ethan spoke, his voice calm, leveled, and surprisingly carrying. "You do not speak to me, mammal," Sareth hissed. "I am speaking to the room," Ethan corrected. "You call me a pet. You call this a transaction. You are half right. There is a contract. It is legal, it is binding, and it is filed with the High Court." Ethan walked toward the furious dragon, stopping just outside striking distance. "But in that contract, which you are welcome to read, there are clauses for autonomy. There are clauses for mutual consent. I am not here because I was purchased. I am here because I accepted the offer." He turned to look at Lyra, catching her gaze. "I choose to stand here," Ethan said, and for the first time, he wasn't acting. Lady Veyron has faced sabotage, assassination attempts, and the ridicule of her own peers. And yet she stands, if that is shame. Counselor, then your definition of honor is broken. He turned back to Sareth. "I am not a pet. I am a partner. And if you want to get to her, you have to go through the contract. And me." Silence stretched tight as a wire. Sareth looked at Ethan, then at the crowd, realizing he had lost the moment. To attack a defenseless human spouse who had just declared his loyalty would be political suicide. Sareth sneered, spun on his heel, and stormed out. Lyra let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at Ethan, her expression unreadable, a mix of shock and something softer, more dangerous. The ride back to the embassy was silent. The armored transport hummed through the sky lanes of High Terra. When they reached Lyra's private quarters, a penthouse suite of glass and stone at the top of the embassy tower, the energy finally broke. Lyra threw her heavy coat onto a chair and paced to the window, staring out at the city. She was shaking. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice tight. "You provoked a high counselor." "He called you a disgrace," Ethan said, loosening his tie and tossing it on the table. "I wasn't going to let him finish. It is dangerous." Lyra spun around, her eyes wet. "Do you not understand? They tried to melt your throat with acid tonight. Ethan, this isn't a game. You are a human. You are fragile. If they decide to remove you, you break. I'm harder to break than I look," Ethan said, walking toward her. Lyra backed up until she hit the cold glass of the window. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why defend me? It is just a job." "You get paid either way, is it?" Ethan asked. He stopped 2 feet from her. Lyra looked up at him. The exhaustion was back, stripping away the diplomat, leaving just a woman who was carrying the weight of a dying house. "I thought," she whispered. I thought humans would only ever see me as a weapon to be used, or a monster to be feared, or a fantasy to be conquered. I thought I had to buy loyalty because I could never earn it. Ethan looked at her, the scales, the eyes, the sharp edges that the galaxy told her made her unlovable. And I thought I would just be a prop, Ethan said softly. A symbol of unity for the cameras. A placeholder. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He didn't. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind her pointed ear. His fingers grazed the sensitive scales of her jaw. She shivered, leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "You are not a weapon, Lyra," Ethan said, "and I am not a symbol." The air between them charged with static. It was the pull of gravity in the corridor again, but this time, there was no danger. Only choice. Lyra opened her eyes. The gold was swirling, molten. She looked at his lips. He looked at hers. The distance between them closed to nothing. They breathed each other's air. The desire was a physical weight, heavy and intoxicating. It would be so easy to cross the line, to let the adrenaline and the fear resolve into passion. But the contract. Clause 4. No forced intimacy. Mutual consent. Ethan stopped. He stopped a millimeter from her mouth. He could feel the heat of her breath. "We don't have to do this to prove anything," he whispered. Lyra looked at him, searching his face. She saw desire, yes, but she saw respect. He was giving her the power to choose. "No," she whispered back. "We don't." She pulled back, just an inch. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, stepping back, putting space between them. The moment held, suspended in amber. They hadn't kissed, but something more intimate had passed between them. A recognition. "Go to sleep, Lyra," Ethan said hoarsely. "We have a war to fight in the morning." Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the guest quarters, the stolen data drive plugged into his personal terminal. His mind was racing, replaying the look in Lyra's eyes, the feel of her scales, the smell of the poison wine. He needed to focus. He needed to be the cold, analytical machine she had hired. He pulled up the data from the archive theft, the trash manifests. Then he pulled up the file he had stolen from his old job, the Aurelian logistics chain. He overlaid the maps. The dates matched. The missing Drakari biostasis pods had been shipped to a facility in the Outer Rim. But not just any facility, Ethan typed in a coordinate search. The destination was a moon listed as uninhabited. But on his stolen logistics file, that moon was receiving weekly shipments of food, medical supplies, and weapons. And the funding source for those shipments? Ethan ran the trace. It wasn't just the syndicate. The credits were being routed through a shell account. He stripped away the layers, one by one. Shell Company Alpha, Holding Firm Beta, Charitable Trust Gamma, the final layer dissolved. Account owner, Galactic Council Defense Budget, Discretionary Fund. Ethan stared at the screen. The unknown raiders attacking the Drakari colonies, the ones slaughtering Lyra's people and forcing them into this desperate marriage pact. They weren't pirates. They were mercenaries paid by the very council Lyra was trying to appease. The council was funding the war against its own member state to force the Drakari into submission, to steal their tech, and to experiment on their biology. Ethan sat back, the blood draining from his face. It wasn't just a conspiracy. It was an extermination plan. He grabbed the drive. He had to tell Lyra. The marriage, the politics, the votes. It was all a distraction. The real knife was already at her throat, and it was being held by the people smiling at her across the gala floor. The shuttle descent into the atmosphere of Ignis Prime was not a gentle glide. It was a controlled fall through a turbulent ocean of sulfur clouds and electromagnetic storms. Inside the plush, velvet-lined cabin of the diplomatic transport, the holographic news feed was playing a cheerful loop. The happy couple's first journey. Lady Lyra and her new consort seek solitude and beauty on the frontier worlds. Ethan Cole watched the footage of himself waving from the spaceport tarmac 2 days ago. He looked stiff in his designer-heavy coat. Lyra looked regal, her arm looped through his, smiling that practiced, razor-thin smile that the cameras loved. He turned off the feed. The reality outside the viewport was far less polished. Ignis Prime was a geological tantrum frozen in time. As they broke through the cloud layer, the landscape revealed itself in jagged, violent glory. Massive canyons glowed red with active magma flows, carving through black basalt plains. Above them, suspended by the planet's erratic magnetic field, islands of rock floated in the sky like broken continents, tethered to the ground by thick durasteel cables. It was beautiful, cinematic, and terrifying. "Welcome to paradise," Ethan muttered, gripping the armrest as the shuttle bucked against a thermal updraft. "I can see why you chose this for our fake honeymoon. Nothing says romance like the smell of burning sulfur and the risk of active volcanoes." Lyra Veyron did not look at the view. She was checking the charge on her wrist-mounted interface, her golden eyes scanning data streams invisible to him. "It is not a honeymoon, Ethan. It is a cover, and we are not here for the view. We are here because the tracking data you found points to the Aurelian Syndicate's primary refinement facility being buried in that northern quadrant." She pointed toward a cluster of industrial spires rising from the edge of a lava lake. "The official itinerary says we are touring the suspended gardens of the upper atmosphere," Lyra continued, adjusting the hidden holster beneath her travel cloak. "But while the press is filming the empty shuttle, we will launch on autopilot. We will be down there." Ethan looked at the facility. It looked less like a factory and more like a fortress. "You know," Ethan said, checking his own gear, a jammer, a decoder, and a stun pulse pistol he had smuggled in his luggage. "Most couples just argue about where to eat dinner. We are breaking into a high-security mining compound run by a paramilitary cartel." Lyra finally looked at him. The tension around her eyes had not softened since the gala. "If we do not find what is in that facility, Ethan, the council will vote to dissolve my house's sovereignty in 3 days. We do not have the luxury of dinner arguments." The shuttle pilot, a droid programmed for discretion, set them down on a private landing pad jutting out from one of the floating islands. The wind howled, carrying the metallic tang of heavy ore. As they disembarked, the sheer scale of the operation became visible. Below them, in the canyon, thousands of figures moved like ants along the extraction riggings. Lyra walked to the edge of the platform, looking down through a pair of macro binoculars. Her posture, usually rigid with diplomatic grace, suddenly went still, dangerously still. "What is it?" Ethan asked, stepping up beside her. "Look," Lyra said, handing him the binoculars. "Sector 4, the extraction line." Ethan raised the lenses. He adjusted the focus until the blur resolved into sharp clarity. He saw workers. They were hauling raw conduit cables through the heat, wearing suits that looked patched and failing. But it was not just the equipment, it was the people. Humans and Drakari were chained together. He saw a human man stumbling under a load, and a Drakari worker, scales gray with ash and malnutrition, using her own shoulder to hold him up, taking the weight. A syndicate overseer in a hovering skiff lashed out with a shock baton, hitting them both. "They are using refugee labor," Ethan said, his voice dropping. That is illegal under 3 different galactic accords. They are using my people, Lyra hissed. And yours. They are working them to death to fulfill the quotas that justify the blockade. She lowered the binoculars. The gold in her eyes was burning with a cold, terrifying fire. It was not the anger of a politician losing a vote. It was the rage of a dragon seeing its kin in chains. We are not just getting the data, Lyra said, turning toward the path that led down into the canyon. We are going to burn that facility to the ground. Ethan caught her arm. Easy. Lyra, we need the proof first. If we blow it up now, the Council will just call it a terrorist attack and use it to justify the military takeover. We get the ledger cores. We get the evidence. Then we burn it. Lyra looked at his hand on her arm. She took a deep breath, the scales on her neck flaring and then smoothing down. You are right, she said tightly. Strategy before vengeance. Strategy before vengeance, Ethan agreed. But after the strategy part, I will hand you the matches. The infiltration was less mission impossible and more a desperate scramble through the guts of an industrial nightmare. They bypassed the main gates by rappelling down a ventilation shaft that vented geothermal steam every 45 seconds. Ethan timed the intervals. 3, 2, 1. Go! They dropped into the shaft, the heat rising instantly to an oppressive 40 degrees Celsius. They slid down the maintenance ladder, boots clanging softly, and swung into the service tunnel just as the vents roared open above them, blasting superheated gas where they had been seconds before. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. If we survive this, he wheezed, checking the seal on his respirator. I am renegotiating my contract. I want hazard pay, and a vacation to an ice planet, somewhere with 0 volcanoes. Lyra was already at the blast door, her interface cable plugged into the locking mechanism. Quiet, she whispered. I am bypassing the biometric scanner. The door hissed open. They slipped into the main server room of the refinement facility. It was a cavernous space, filled with rows of towering data cores that hummed with a low, menacing vibration. The only light came from the blue status LEDs and the red glow of the magma outside the reinforced windows. Ethan moved to the central console. This is it. The master ledger. If the syndicate is cooking the books or hiding a black budget project, it will be in here. He connected his decoder. The screen flooded with encrypted text. Lyra stood guard at the door, her stun pistol drawn. Her senses were dialed up to maximum. She could smell the ozone of the servers, the sulfur outside, and the faint, acrid scent of the human guards patrolling the corridor. Hurry, she murmured. I am going as fast as I can, Ethan muttered, his fingers flying. Their encryption is adaptive. It changes the key every 10 seconds. It is like trying to solve a puzzle while the pieces are melting. Got it, he said suddenly, downloading the core files now. The progress bar crawled. 20%, 40%. Suddenly, the room turned red. A klaxon began to wail, a sound so loud it vibrated in their teeth. Intruder alert, a synthetic voice boomed. Sector 7G, lockdown initiated. They found us, Lyra said, raising her weapon. No, Ethan said, pulling the data drive. I tripped a silent alarm attached to a specific file. Whatever I just downloaded, they really did not want anyone to see it. The blast door began to close. Run! Lyra shouted. They sprinted for the door, diving through the narrowing gap just as it slammed shut, sealing the server room. They were in the corridor now, but the lights were flashing emergency crimson. Boots thundered on the metal grating. A squad of syndicate mercenaries rounded the corner, armored in heavy riot gear. There, one shouted. Laser fire erupted, sizzling through the air. Ethan returned fire with his stun pulse, dropping the point man. Lyra moved with a fluidity that defied physics. She didn't just run, she flowed. She grabbed a steam pipe, ripped it loose from the wall with strength no human possessed, and swung it like a battering ram, knocking two mercenaries into the wall. "This way," Ethan yelled, pointing to a disposal chute. "It's a trash chute," Lyra yelled back, ducking a plasma bolt. "It leads to the lower lava tubes. It's the only way out." Lyra looked at the chute, then at the squad of 20 reinforcements charging down the hall. "Fine," she growled. "But if I land in garbage, you are never hearing the end of it." They jumped. The slide was dark, steep, and terrifyingly fast. They shot out the other end, landing hard on a pile of slag and industrial waste in a dim, subterranean tunnel. The heat here was intense. The walls were natural rock, glowing dull red. A river of sluggish lava flowed 10 feet below the walkway. Ethan groaned, sitting up and picking a banana peel, or the alien equivalent, off his shoulder. "See?" Ethan said, wincing as he stood. "Not so bad. It smells a bit like burning rubber and despair. But we are alive." Lyra stood up, dusting off her pristine stealth suit, which was no longer pristine. She glared at him, but the corners of her mouth twitched. "Next time, husband," she said, emphasizing the word. "I choose the escape route, and it will involve a luxury elevator. Or I could just throw you into that geothermal vent over there," she added, pointing to a hissing crack in the floor. "It would be faster." Ethan grinned, wiping soot from his cheek. "You wouldn't? Who would carry the luggage?" Lyra looked at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a strange, vibrating energy between them. She smirked. "I suppose good porters are hard to find. Come on. The safe house is 3 miles north through these tubes." The safe house was an abandoned geological survey station, half embedded in the rock face of a cliff. Outside, the storm had broken, and rain was falling, heavy, boiling rain that sizzled when it hit the ground. Inside, it was dry and cool. Ethan had managed to get the power generator running, casting a soft yellow light over the small utilitarian room. Lyra sat on a crate, stripping off her ruined outer armor. Her shoulder was bruised where a stray projectile had grazed her. "Let me see that," Ethan said, grabbing the med kit. He knelt beside her. Lyra flinched instinctively as he reached out, then forced herself to relax. "It is just a bruise," she said quietly. "It's a hematoma," Ethan corrected. "Hold still." He applied a dermal regenerator. The cool gel soothed the burning ache. Lyra watched his hands. They were scarred, steady, and gentle. He wasn't afraid of her. That was the thing she couldn't quite wrap her mind around. Most humans looked at Drakari and saw monsters or masters. Ethan looked at her and saw a bruise that needed fixing. "Why do you do this?" Lyra asked suddenly. The silence of the cave felt heavy, compressing the distance between them. "Do what?" Ethan asked, packing the kit away. "Risk your life. You could have taken the money and stayed in the embassy. You could have stayed on the ship. Tonight, you jumped down a garbage chute to cover my back. That was not in the contract." Ethan sat back on his heels, looking up at her. The humor was gone from his face. The contract was a piece of paper. "Lyra, this is real." He looked toward the door, where the rain lashed against the metal. "I spent 10 years moving boxes for people who didn't care if I lived or died. I was a number in a spreadsheet. When I met you, I thought you were just another executive looking for a tax write-off." He looked back at her. "But you're not. You're terrified, Lyra. I can see it. You are terrified of failing your people, of losing your honor, of being the last of your line, and yet you keep fighting." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. I didn't fall for the diplomat. Lyra, I didn't fall for the dragon girl. I am falling for the person who stood in that gala and poured acid wine on the floor to save my life. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Falling. He had said falling. Lyra started, her voice uncharacteristically small. I expected duty. I was raised to believe that alliances are transactions, that love is a weakness that politicians cannot afford. She looked at his hand. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and covered it with her own. Her skin was cool. His was warm. Her claws were sharp enough to cut glass, but she held him with a tenderness that made her chest ache. But when you are in danger, Lyra whispered, I do not feel like a politician. I feel like I would burn the galaxy to keep you safe, and that terrifies me more than the council. Ethan turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. The contact was electric. It wasn't sexual, not yet. It was something deeper. It was an acknowledgement of shared gravity. You don't have to be untouchable with me, Ethan said softly. Lyra leaned forward and their foreheads touched. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, rain, sweat, and cheap soap. We are alone, she whispered. No cameras, no voters, just us, Ethan said. He leaned in, his lips brushing her cheek. Lyra turned her head, seeking him. It was a moment of absolute choice. There was no coercion, no political theater. Just a man and a woman in a cave at the end of the world, deciding to bridge the gap between species. They almost kissed. The air crackled with the potential of it. A heat that threatened to consume them both. Then the data drive on the table beeped. It was a sharp, insistent sound that shattered the mood like a hammer through glass. Lyra pulled back, blinking as if waking from a dream. Ethan let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. The download is finished decrypting, he said, his voice rough. Lyra stood up, the moment stored away but not forgotten. She walked to the terminal, her diplomat's armor sliding back into place. Let us see what was worth dying for, she said. Ethan joined her. They looked at the screen. The file was titled Project Dragonfall. Ethan scrolled through the documents, and with every page the horror grew. It is not just a weapon, Ethan said, reading the technical specs. It is a genetic pathogen, targeted specifically at Drakari DNA. It suppresses the fire gland production and weakens the skeletal structure. It turns you human, but weak, crippled. They want to domesticate us, Lyra whispered, her face pale. They want to strip us of our biological advantages so we can be easily controlled, integrated into the workforce as cheap labor. Ethan scrolled to the authorization log. To test this, they needed live subjects. That is what the frontier raids were for. They were capturing colonists for vivisection. He stopped scrolling. At the bottom of the authorization chain, there was a digital seal, a signature approving the transfer of test subjects to the Ignis Prime lab. Lyra froze. She knew that seal. It was a stylized dragon coiled around a star. That is the Veyron crest, she said, her voice hollow. Ethan looked at her. Your house? My aunt, Lyra said. Lady Calith. She is the only other person with the biometric key to authorize this seal. She leaned against the table, the betrayal hitting her harder than any bullet. My own blood, she whispered. She is selling us out. She is helping them build a cage for her own people in exchange for… What? Power? Safety? Safety, Ethan said grimly. If she helps them, maybe she thinks she will be the last one eaten. Lyra's grief hardened instantly into resolve. She straightened up, her eyes dry and dangerous. She chose the wrong side. A high-pitched whine cut through the noise of the rain outside. Ethan's head snapped up. Drones. We stayed too long, he said, grabbing the drive. They tracked the decryption signal. The front of the safe house exploded and the blast threw them both across the room. Debris rained down, chunks of rock and twisted metal. Ethan coughed, waving away the dust. "Lyra! I am here!" she called from behind an overturned table. Through the hole in the wall, a swarm of hunter-killer drones poured in, their red optic sensors scanning the gloom. "Go!" Lyra yelled. "The back exit." They scrambled out the rear airlock, emerging onto a narrow cliffside landing pad where a rusted emergency beacon stood. The wind was howling now, a full gale-force storm. Below them, the canyon dropped 2,000 feet into darkness. Above, the drone swarm buzzed like angry hornets, firing suppression bolts that chewed up the rock around their feet. "We are trapped," Ethan yelled, firing his stun pistol uselessly at the armored machines. "We need to jump," Lyra shouted, grabbing his hand. "Jump where?" Ethan yelled back. "It is a 2,000-foot drop. Trust me." A laser bolt struck the ground inches from Ethan's boot. He stumbled, losing his balance on the slick, rain-slicked rock. He fell. "Ethan!" He slid over the edge, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the wet stone. He caught the lip of the cliff, dangling over the abyss. Lyra lunged for him, but a drone swooped down, blocking her path, its weapon charging. She had a choice: defend herself or save him. It wasn't a choice at all. Lyra roared, a sound that was primal and terrifying. She reached up to the clasp at her neck, the heavy ceremonial piece Ethan had joked about, and tore it off. Underneath, the nanomesh fabric of her suit reacted to her neural command. Two massive, translucent wings of hard light energy and alloy unfurled from the generator nodes along her spine. They spanned 20 feet, glowing with blue plasma. It was ancient tech, the kind she had shown him in the archives, integrated into her modern armor. She didn't engage the drone. She launched herself off the cliff. She dove past Ethan, her wings tucking tight for speed, then snapped them open. The air cracked with the force of her deceleration. She swooped up, her arms locking around Ethan's waist just as his grip failed. "Got you!" she screamed over the wind. The sensation was impossible. Ethan felt himself yanked upward, the G-force pressing the air from his lungs. He looked up and saw Lyra, not as a diplomat, not as a woman, but as a myth, made real. Her wings beat against the storm, burning with power, carrying them both through the lightning. She banked hard, weaving through the drone fire, and landed them heavily on the upper deck of a syndicate supply depot, a mile away from the ambush. The wings flickered and vanished, retracting into her suit. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhausted by the energy drain. Ethan scrambled to her, pulling her up. "That," he gasped, breathless. "That was the coolest thing I have ever seen." "I told you," Lyra panted, a wild grin breaking through her fatigue. "I am not a space peacock." They were on the roof of the depot. Below them, in the courtyard, the workers, thousands of them, were being marshaled by guards, sensing the chaos of the attack. Lyra looked at the data drive in Ethan's hand. Then she looked at the communications tower on the roof. "We have the evidence," Ethan said. "We can take a ship, get back to the council, and present it. We can clear your name. If we go to the council, it will take weeks to deliberate." Lyra said, "Calith will bury the truth. And these people," she gestured to the courtyard, "they will be liquidated to hide the evidence before we even file the motion." She looked at Ethan. "I am not a politician today." "Ethan." She ran to the communications tower and jacked the drive into the broadcast node. What are you doing? Ethan asked, though he already knew. I am giving them the truth, Lyra said. She bypassed the encryption and hit broadcast, all frequencies, local and galactic. Below them, the massive holographic screens in the mining yard flickered. The face of the syndicate overseer was replaced by the documents they had stolen. The audio played the recording of Lady Calith authorizing the vivisection of the workers. Then, Lyra's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. This is Lyra Veyron of the High Council. The orders you follow are illegal. The debts you are working off are lies. You are not assets. You are free. Chaos erupted in the courtyard. The workers, seeing the proof of their exploitation, turned on the guards. It wasn't a riot, it was a revolution. We just started a war, Ethan said, watching the perimeter fence fall. We just finished one, Lyra corrected, or at least, the first battle. She pointed to a sleek, unmarked courier ship sitting on the depot's private pad. That is our ride. They sprinted for the ship as the facility around them descended into anarchy. Ethan hot-wired the airlock while Lyra provided covering fire against the few remaining drones. They blasted off just as the syndicate reinforcements arrived, punching through the atmosphere and into the black. In the silence of deep space, the courier ship hummed. Ethan sat in the co-pilot seat, watching the navigation computer calculate a jump to nowhere. They couldn't go back to High Terra. They couldn't go to Drakari space. We are fugitives, Ethan said, reading the bounty notice that had just hit the subspace net. The syndicate has put a price on our heads, and your aunt has declared you a rogue agent. Lyra stared out at the stars. She had lost her title, her home, and her standing. She was an exile. She looked at Ethan. I have lost everything, she said quietly. Ethan reached across the console and took her hand. Not everything. Lyra looked at him, and the ghost of a smile touched her lips. No, she agreed. Not everything. She squeezed his hand. Set a course for the outer rim. Husband. We have a journalist to find. The transmission signal was bouncing off 3 different relay satellites to mask its origin, terminating in a cramped, smoke-filled studio on the fringes of the free trade zone. Mara Tenz, the galaxy's most wanted satirist, sat behind a console that looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster fire. She had shocking pink hair, a cybernetic eye that whirred when she zoomed in, and a voice that could strip paint off a hull. So let me get this straight, Mara said, leaning back in her chair and propping her combat boots on the console. You are telling me that the wedding of the century, the Dragon Girl and the logistics guy, is actually a cover for a massive conspiracy involving genetic splicing, shadow corporations, and a plan to turn an entire species into obedient super soldiers? She took a drag from a vapor stick and exhaled a cloud of mint-scented smoke. And here I thought it was just a midlife crisis, you know. Rich girl gets bored, buys a human husband to annoy her dad. It is a classic trope. I was going to do a whole segment on it titled Love is Blind. But it accepts credit chips. Ethan Cole stood in the corner of the small room, arms crossed. We saw the labs, Mara. We saw the chains. Lyra Veyron sat opposite Mara. She looked out of place in the clutter of the studio, her silken heavy coat stained with soot from their escape on Ignis Prime. But her gaze was steady. It is not a joke. Ms. Tenz. They are using the marriage as a distraction while they erase my people's history and autonomy. We need your help to broadcast the truth. We need a platform that the Council cannot censor. Mara looked at Lyra, studying her with her good eye and the mechanical one. She saw the exhaustion, the dirt, and the fierce, unyielding pride. Mara dropped the act. She leaned forward, tapping ash onto the floor. I know it is not a joke, Your Highness. I have been tracking the Aurelian Syndicate's money trails for 6 months. I just couldn't figure out what they were buying. I thought it was weapons. She pulled up a screen, her fingers flying across the keys. If what you are saying is true, they aren't buying weapons. They are making them out of you. That makes me angry. And when I get angry, I get very, very loud. She looked at the data drive Ethan had placed on the desk. But this is raw footage. It is shocking. Sure, but the council spin doctors will call it a deep fake within 5 minutes. You need the blueprints. You need the hard science, the chemical formulas, the genetic schematics. You need the smoking gun that proves how they are doing it. Not just that they are doing it. We know where the blueprints are, Ethan said. The inventory logs from the Drakari archive theft pointed to a transfer location, the Cortex. Mara let out a low whistle. The Cortex? That is not a library. Honey, that is a black market data vault orbiting a neutron star. It is run by information brokers who would sell their own mothers for a decryption key. You can't just walk in and check out a book. We do not intend to check it out, Lyra said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. We intend to steal it. The Cortex was a marvel of illegal engineering. It was a rotating torus station, shielded by heavy gravitational dampeners to keep the neutron star's pull from tearing it apart. Inside, it was a neutral ground for spies, thieves, and scholars of the forbidden. It was also hosting the masquerade ball of the season. The invitation Mara had forged got them past the perimeter drones. The disguises were meant to get them inside the vault, in the prep room of their stolen courier ship. Ethan adjusted the hollow emitter clipped to his collar. His reflection in the mirror shimmered and warped. Instead of a human male, he now appeared to be a Krelian merchant, a species known for being short, rotund, and blue, with 4 arms. I hate this, Ethan muttered, waving his 2 real arms while his 2 holographic arms mimicked the motion. I look like a blueberry with a glandular problem. You look inconspicuous, Lyra said. She was standing behind him, adjusting her own emitter. Her disguise was less transformative but equally effective. She had masked her Drakari features, the horns, the scales, the eyes, to appear as a high-born human aristocrat. Her skin was smooth, her eyes a dull, human brown. She looked beautiful, but she looked ordinary. It is unsettling, Ethan said, looking at her. You look like everyone else. I feel naked, Lyra admitted, touching her face where her scales should be. Without my armor, I feel small. Ethan turned to her. The blue hollow shimmer of his disguise flickered for a moment. You could never be small. Lyra, even like that, you take up all the air in the room. Lyra looked at him, surprised by the sudden sincerity. Then she smirked. Compliments will not save you from having to distract the guards. Husband, remember the plan. Mara loops the security feed. You cause a scene in the main atrium. I enter the 0G vault and retrieve the data core, and try not to float away, Ethan added. I was trained in orbital maneuvering before I could walk, Lyra said dryly. Just try not to trip over your extra arms. The atrium of the Cortex was a sensory overload. Music that sounded like grinding glass and heavy bass throbbed through the floor. The guests were a menagerie of species, all hiding behind masks or hollow fields, trading secrets over drinks that smoked and bubbled. Ethan waddled into the center of the room, channeling every ounce of chaotic energy he possessed. He bumped into a towering robotic sentinel, spilling a drink that Mara had chemically altered to be highly corrosive to durasteel. Watch it. You tin can! Ethan shouted, his voice modulated to a high-pitched squeak by the emitter. Do you know who I am? I am the Grand Duke of the Krelian Nebula. The robot looked down, its optical sensors zooming in on the corrosive liquid eating through its foot plating. Alarms began to chirp. Meanwhile, Lyra slipped into the shadows of the upper mezzanine. She moved with a liquid grace that her human disguise could not hide. She reached the ventilation seal of the vault sector. Mara's voice crackled in her earpiece. "I have looped the cameras. You have 3 minutes before the system realizes the robot downstairs is melting. Go." Lyra engaged the magnetic locks on her boots and stepped into the airlock. She hit the cycle button. The gravity vanished. The vault was a sphere of absolute silence. Thousands of data crystals floated in suspension fields, glowing like trapped stars. There was no floor, no ceiling, just a dizzying array of information. Lyra kicked off the wall, soaring through the center of the room. She twisted in midair, dodging the red laser grids that crisscrossed the space. She located the sector marked Xenobiology, restricted. There, a black crystal, pulsing with a faint, sickly green light. She reached for it. Suddenly, the station shuddered. The gravity dampeners flickered. "Lyra!" Ethan's voice came over the comms. Panicked, the robot didn't just melt, it exploded. The security protocols are locking down the whole station. Lyra grabbed the crystal. The laser grid snapped from red to violet, lethal intensity. "I have it," she hissed, firing a grapple line to the exit hatch. She reeled herself in, narrowly missing a laser beam that sliced the heel off her boot. She slammed into the airlock, hitting the cycle button just as the vacuum alarms began to scream. She tumbled out into the corridor, gravity returning with a bone-jarring slam. She sprinted toward the rendezvous point. Ethan was waiting there, his hollow disguise flickering wildly. He had discarded the Krelian persona and was firing his stun pistol at a squad of security drones. "Took you long enough," he yelled. "I had to avoid being sliced into ribbons," Lyra shouted back, drawing her own weapon. They fought their way back to the docking bay, moving in a rhythm that was becoming second nature. Ethan suppressed the targets on the left. Lyra took the ones on the right. They didn't need to speak. They covered each other's blind spots perfectly. They reached the ship. Mara had the engines revving hot. "Get in!" Mara screamed over the intercom. They dove up the ramp just as the hangar doors began to close. The ship blasted out, scraping the paint off its hull against the narrowing gap. Safe in deep space, the adrenaline crash hit them like a physical blow. Ethan paced the small mess hall of the courier ship. He was angry. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the residual terror of watching Lyra's biomonitor flatline for a second when the gravity failed. "You took too long," he snapped, turning on her. "You waited to grab the crystal even after the dampeners failed. You could have been spaced." "Lyra, I had to get the data," Lyra argued, standing her ground. She was still wearing the human disguise, but the hollow emitter was failing, making her scales flicker in and out of existence like a glitching ghost. What was I supposed to do? Leave it? "Yes," Ethan shouted. "Yes, you leave it. The mission doesn't matter if you are dead. It matters to my people," Lyra yelled back, her voice cracking. "It matters to the thousands of workers in chains. I am not just a person, Ethan. I am a vessel for their survival. If I die, but I cannot fail." Ethan stopped pacing. He looked at her, really looked at her. He walked over and grabbed her shoulders. "Stop saying that." Lyra blinked, startled by his intensity. "Stop saying what?" "Stop saying you are a vessel. Stop saying you are expendable." Ethan's voice was low, trembling with an emotion he had been trying to bury for weeks. "You are not a symbol, Lyra. You are the woman who laughs at my bad jokes. You are the woman who drinks terrible coffee because she doesn't want to hurt my feelings." You are. You. He took a breath. I did not sign up to protect a diplomat. I signed up to protect you. And when you act like your life is just currency to be spent, it kills me. Lyra stared at him. The anger drained out of her, leaving her exposed. She reached up and deactivated her hollow disguise. The shimmer vanished, revealing her true face, the gold eyes, the iridescent scales, the alien beauty that the galaxy called monstrous. She looked tired. She looked vulnerable. I do not know how to be anything else, she whispered. All my life, I have been a piece on a board. Valuable, yes, but only because of what I could buy or who I could marry. I have never been just Lyra. Ethan's hands slid from her shoulders to cup her face. His thumbs brushed the ridges of her cheekbones. Then let me show you, he said softly. The silence in the ship was thick, heavy with the hum of the drive and the beating of their hearts. Lyra leaned into his touch. It was a surrender. Not a political concession, but a personal one. She let go of the high diplomat. She let go of the savior, and I am scared. Ethan, she confessed, her voice barely audible. I am scared that if we stop running, the weight of everything will crush us. I have got you, Ethan said. I am sturdy. He lowered his forehead to hers. It was an intimacy that transcended the physical. It was a promise. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, he whispered. Lyra closed her eyes, and a single tear tracked through the gold dust of her scales. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. They stood there for a long time, swaying slightly with the ship's vibration, anchoring each other in the void. There was no desperate groping, no tearing of clothes. It was deeper than that. It was the forging of a bond that no contract could dictate. It was the quiet, terrifying realization that they were no longer two people fighting a war. They were one entity, and that made them dangerous. A cough from the doorway broke the moment. Mara stood there, holding a tablet, looking uncharacteristically serious. I hate to interrupt the romance novel, she said, her voice lacking its usual sarcastic bite. But you need to see this. I cracked the encryption on the crystal. Lyra and Ethan pulled apart, though Ethan kept his hand on Lyra's lower back. They followed Mara to the cockpit. The main screen was filled with complex genetic helices and tactical maps. This is Project Dragonfall, Mara said, pointing to a swirling red strand of DNA. It is not just a suppression virus. It is an integration protocol. Integration? Lyra asked, her blood running cold. They are splicing Drakari traits into human genomes, Mara explained. Specifically the regenerative scales and the adrenal reflex speed. They are trying to build super soldiers. But the Drakari DNA is volatile. It rejects the human host unless the donor is neutralized. Neutralized? Ethan asked. Harvested, Mara said grimly. They need fresh genetic material constantly. They don't just want to rule you, Lyra. They want to farm you. Lyra gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles turning white. But that is not the worst part, Mara continued. She tapped a map. It showed the upcoming Galactic Unity Summit. The text on the screen read, Phase 2, Catalyst Event. The catalyst is a false flag attack, Mara said. They are going to blow up the summit, and they are going to blame it on a rogue faction of Drakari extremists. Lyra's eyes widened. A false flag. That would justify a total military occupation of Drakari space. It would allow the Council to mandate security integration. The conscription of my people into these camps. And look at the target, Ethan said, pointing to a highlighted section of the plan. Primary casualty target, the cross-species union representatives. Lyra felt the room spin. Us. she whispered. They want to kill us. It makes sense, Ethan said, his voice hard as iron. We are the symbols of unity. If Drakari extremists assassinate their own diplomat and her human husband, it proves that the Drakari are savages who hate peace. It proves that integration is the only way to control them. Lyra realized the full, sickening scope of the trap. Her marriage hadn't been a clever subversion. It had been anticipated. It had been allowed. They wanted her to marry a human. They wanted a perfect, tragedy-ready victim. I walked right into it, she said, her voice trembling with rage. I paid for my own execution. Proximity alert. The ship's computer blared. A massive shadow fell over them. Outside the viewport, a sleek, predatory warship decloaked. It was black, bearing the silver crest of House Veyron, but stripped of its diplomatic colors. It is a Hunter-class destroyer, Lyra said, my aunt's flagship. The comms crackled open. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the cockpit. Lady Calith stood there, tall and imperious, her scales polished to a shine that looked like armor. Niece, Calith said. Her voice was smooth, devoid of warmth. You have caused quite a mess. You are a traitor, Lyra spat, stepping into the projection field. You sold our blood to the Syndicate. I secured our future, Calith corrected calmly. The galaxy is changing. Lyra, the dragons of old are gone. We must adapt or die. Integration gives us a place in the new order, a privileged place. Now for those who cooperate... Cooperation? Ethan stepped forward. You mean slavery? Calith's eyes flicked to Ethan, dismissing him as one might dismiss a piece of furniture. Mr. Cole, I have a proposition for you. She pressed a button, and a file transfer appeared on Ethan's datapad. 10 million credits. A new identity on a paradise world in the core systems. Full immunity. All you have to do is surrender Lyra to my custody and testify that she was radicalized by Drakari separatists. Ethan looked at the number. It was more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. It was freedom. It was safety. And you, Lyra. Calith continued. Return with me. Play your part at the summit. We will stage a rescue instead of an assassination. You will live. You will remain high diplomat. You just have to let the integration bill pass. Lyra looked at her aunt. She saw the fear behind the arrogance. Calith was terrified of the same thing Lyra was, extinction. But Calith had chosen to survive on her knees. Lyra looked at Ethan. He hadn't even looked at the money. Well, Calith asked, do we have a deal? Ethan looked up at the hologram. He smiled, but it was a wolf smile. You made a mistake. Lady Calith, did I? You checked my resume, Ethan said. You saw logistics analyst. You saw contractor. You thought I was a man who moved boxes for money. You forgot to check the references. He tapped his datapad, but he didn't accept the transfer. He forwarded a file. I just sent your financial records to the Aurelian Syndicate's internal auditors, Ethan said. Specifically, the accounts where you have been skimming off the top of their payments to you. You are stealing from your partners. Calith. The hologram flickered. Calith's composure cracked. What? I found it in the ledger, Ethan said. You are not just a traitor. You are an embezzler. The Syndicate doesn't like it when their hired help steals from them. They are probably intercepting this transmission right now. Calith roared, her face twisting into a snarl. Destroy them! She screamed to her crew. The destroyer's weapons ports opened. Hang on! Mara yelled, slamming the throttle forward. The courier ship dove. Laser fire raked across their shields. Sparks showered the cockpit. We can't outrun a Hunter class, Lyra shouted, strapping into the co-pilot seat. We don't have to outrun them, Ethan yelled. We just have to survive long enough for the Syndicate to turn on her. The ship shuddered violently. A direct hit took out the starboard engine. "We are losing power," Mara screamed. They were spinning out of control. The destroyer loomed large, preparing a tractor beam. Suddenly, a second ship appeared on the sensors. A Syndicate heavy cruiser, jumping in from hyperspace. "They took the bait." Ethan laughed, though it sounded hysterical. The Syndicate cruiser opened fire, not on the heroes, but on Kalith's ship. The two giants began to trade broadsides, ignoring the tiny courier ship slipping away into the debris field. "We are clear," Mara yelled. "Not quite," the computer warned. "Hull breach in Sector 4. Atmospheric venting." "That is the cargo hold," Mara said. "My equipment is in there." She unbuckled. "I have to secure the broadcast array. If we lose that, we can't transmit the proof." "No," Lyra shouted. "Mara, it is too dangerous." Mara ignored her. She sprinted out of the cockpit. Seconds later, the ship lurched. A stray tractor beam from Kalith's ship had grazed them, shearing off the rear cargo pod. "Mara!" Ethan screamed. The sensors showed the cargo pod spinning away, caught in the tractor beam's wake. It was being pulled toward Kalith's destroyer. "She is gone," the computer stated flatly. "Life signs detected in the detached pod. She is being boarded." Lyra stared at the screen. Mara was captured. Kalith had her. "We have to go back," Ethan said, grabbing the controls. "We can't," Lyra said, her voice dead. "Look at the damage readout. We have 1 engine and 12% shield integrity. If we turn around, we die, and the truth dies with us." Ethan slammed his fist into the console. "So we leave her?" Lyra looked at the retreating battle. Her eyes were burning dry. "No," she said, "we do not leave her, but we cannot save her here." She pointed to the nav computer. "Kalith is going to the Unity Summit. That is where the endgame is. She will take Mara there to interrogate her, to find out what we know." Lyra turned to Ethan. "We are going to the summit." Ethan looked at her. "We are fugitives. Lyra, the entire galaxy is looking for us. We have a broken ship and no backup. You want to crash the biggest diplomatic event in history?" Lyra Veyron stood up. She touched the spot on her neck where the ceremonial clasp used to be. She looked like a queen who had lost her kingdom but found her sword. "I do not want to crash it. Husband," she said. "I want to burn it down." Ethan looked at the determination in her face. He felt that familiar pull, the gravity of her will. He sat back in the pilot's seat. He wiped the blood from his lip and engaged the hyperdrive. "To the summit, then," he said. "Let's go make a scene." The flagship Obsidian was a leviathan of war, a sleek dagger of black metal cutting through the void above the Unity Station. It was the pride of House Veyron, a fortress that bristled with railguns and interceptor squadrons. To Lyra, it looked like a tomb. She sat in the pilot's seat of the battered courier ship, her hands flying across the console as she broadcast a stolen transponder code. "Transmission confirmed," the ship's computer stated. "We are cleared for docking. Bay 7. Ethan stood behind her, checking the charge on his stun pulse pistol. He looked pale, the stress of the last 48 hours carving deep lines around his eyes. But his hands were steady. "We have 15 minutes before the Unity Summit begins," Ethan said. "That means we have 10 minutes to get in, find Mara, and get out before Kalith realizes her supply shuttle is actually a Trojan horse." Lyra engaged the docking clamps. The ship shuddered as it locked onto the massive hull of the Obsidian. "We do not just need to get Mara," Lyra said, standing up and smoothing the front of her ruined diplomatic coat. "We need to disable the flagship's jamming array. If we do not, the summit will never receive the signal from the data drive. The truth will die in this hangar." She looked at Ethan, You handle the jammers. I will get Mara. Ethan frowned. Splitting up? That is usually the part in the Hollow movie where everyone dies. It is the only way to beat the clock, Lyra said. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. Trust me, I trust you, Ethan said immediately. It is the 3,000 armed Drakari elites I am worried about. They moved quickly. The airlock cycled, and they stepped into the cavernous hangar bay of the Obsidian. It was bustling with activity. Maintenance drones, loading crews, and squads of armored guards preparing for the false flag operation. They blended in using the chaos of the moment. Ethan slipped toward the engineering bulkheads, while Lyra moved with the purposeful stride of a high-ranking officer toward the detention block. She didn't sneak. She walked as if she owned the deck plating beneath her boots. When a guard moved to intercept her, she simply stared him down until his genetic deference to her bloodline kicked in and he stepped aside. Lyra reached the brig. 2 heavy shock troopers guarded the door. Lady Veyron, one stammered, his eyes widening. We were told you were indisposed, Lyra finished, her voice like cracking ice. My aunt has been misinformed. Step aside. The trooper hesitated. Orders, my lady. No entry without authorization from Calith herself. Lyra didn't blink. She stepped into his personal space, towering over him. I am the high diplomat of this house. My authorization is written in my DNA. Open the door, or I will have you stripped of your rank and sent to scrub plasma manifolds in the outer rim. The trooper swallowed hard. He keyed the door. Inside. Mara Tenz was strapped to an interrogation chair. She looked battered. Her pink hair was matted with blood, and her cybernetic eye was flickering, but she was smiling. Took you long enough, Mara croaked. I was just explaining to the nice torture droid that his bedside manner is atrocious. Lyra had her restraints undone in seconds. Can you walk? Mara stumbled, grabbing Lyra's shoulder. I can run if there is an explosion behind me. Good, Lyra said, handing her a spare pistol. Because there is about to be high above on the command deck. The alarms began to scream. Lady Calith stood by the tactical map, watching the icon of the false flagship, a remote-piloted freighter packed with explosives, approach the Unity station. Intruder alert, the tactical officer shouted. Engineering and detention. Calith's face twisted. She knew. She is here, Calith whispered. Lock down the hangar, she ordered, and bring me my niece, alive. Ethan was elbow deep in the circuitry of the communications junction when the blast doors slammed shut. The corridor lights turned to emergency red. He had cut the primary power to the jammers. But the backup generators were kicking in. He needed to sever the hardline. Freeze! Ethan spun around. A squad of elites had rounded the corner, weapons raised. He raised his hands. Don't shoot, he yelled. I am just the repair guy. The lead guard fired. Ethan dove, rolling behind a server stack as plasma scorched the metal where his head had been. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a logistician. He knew how things were built, and he knew how to break them. He pulled a coolant pipe loose. Super-chilled gas blasted into the corridor, creating a wall of freezing fog. The guards shouted, their thermal optics blinded. Ethan scrambled into the ventilation shaft, crawling fast. He tapped his comms. Lyra, the jammers are down, but I have company. Meet at the hangar. Copy. Lyra's voice came back, strained. We are moving. Ethan dropped out of the vent directly above the hangar control room. He landed on a technician, apologized, stunned him, and then smashed the hangar door release. The massive bay doors groaned open, revealing the star-filled void. Lyra and Mara were sprinting across the flight deck, pinned down by fire from the upper gantries. Ethan ran to join them, firing his stun pulse wildly to keep the guards' heads down. They reached the courier ship, but the ramp was blocked. Lady Calith stood there. She was flanked by her personal honor guard, 6 massive Drakari warriors in ceremonial power armor. Calith herself wore a combat skin suit, her face a mask of disappointment. "It is over." "Lyra!" Calith shouted, her voice amplified by the ship's PA system. "The summit has begun. The target ship is on approach. You cannot stop history." Lyra signaled Ethan and Mara to hold back. She stepped forward, alone. "This is not history." "Aunt," Lyra shouted back, "it is a murder-suicide. You are sacrificing our honor for a cage. I am buying our survival." Calith retorted, descending the ramp. "Look at us, Lyra. We are ancient predators in a galaxy of bureaucrats. They fear us. They will always fear us. If we do not give them a leash to hold, they will put us down. I am choosing the terms of our surrender." "Power justifies sacrifice," Calith screamed. "No!" Lyra's voice rang out, cutting through the noise of the hangar. "Power without conscience is extinction-wearing jewelry," Lyra said. "You think you are saving us? You are selling us by the pound to the syndicate. You are not a leader. You are a butcher with a title." Calith snarled, drawing a vibro-blade. "Then die with your conscience." She lunged. Lyra didn't draw a weapon. She stepped into the strike, moving with the fluid grace of the Veyron combat style. She caught Calith's wrist, twisting it with bone-breaking force. Calith gasped, dropping the blade. Lyra swept her leg, knocking her aunt to the deck. She held Calith down, her claws poised over her aunt's throat. The honor guard raised their weapons. "Stand down!" Lyra roared at them, her eyes glowing with the full intensity of her alpha dominance. "I am Lyra Veyron, High Diplomat of this house. Your oath is to the bloodline, not the person. This woman has conspired with foreign powers to enslave your kin." She looked at the guard captain. "Do you have children, Captain? Do you want them to be test subjects in a syndicate lab? Because that is what she signed for." The captain hesitated. He looked at Calith, defeated on the floor, and then at Lyra, burning with righteous fury. He lowered his weapon. "Secure her," Lyra ordered, shoving Calith toward the guards. "And get out of my way." Ethan and Mara ran up the ramp. "That was terrifying," Ethan said, breathless. "Remind me never to make you angry." Lyra looked at him, the fire fading from her eyes to leave raw exhaustion. "Fly," she said. The courier ship blasted out of the Obsidian's hangar, weaving through the defensive fire. Inside the cockpit, the mood was frantic. "We have 4 minutes until the freighter hits the station," Mara yelled, plugging her data slate into the ship's comms. "And I am mad." She hit a button. The Obsidian's jammers were dead, thanks to Ethan. Her signal punched through. She wasn't broadcasting to the council. She was broadcasting to the public, to every data pad, holoscreen, and newsfeed in the sector. "Hello, Galaxy." Mara's voice boomed over the speakers, manic and sharp. "This is Mara Tens, coming to you live from a stolen getaway car, fleeing a warship that currently wants to vaporize me. You might know me as the comedian you hate watch, but today I am your tour guide to the apocalypse." On the screen, she pulled up the live feed of the Unity Summit. "See that boring meeting? See all those politicians talking about peace? Well, in about 3 minutes, a remote-controlled bomb is going to turn them into confetti. And guess who paid for the fireworks?" Spoiler alert, it wasn't the dragons. Ethan flew the ship like a madman, pushing the engines past the red line. The station loomed ahead, a massive wheel of glass and light. "I can see the freighter," Ethan shouted. "It is on an intercept course, Sector 9. That is the main assembly hall." "Security is standing down," Lyra said, reading the tactical display. "They are opening the defense grid. They are letting it through. They are waiting for the impact to blame us." Ethan said. Lyra looked at him. The cockpit was shaking violently. The heat from the engines was raising the temperature in the cabin. Ethan turned to look at her. His hands were white-knuckled on the yoke. Lyra, if we do this, if we crash this party, there is no going back. Your house will be ruined. You will be stripped of everything. I know, Lyra said. I did this to you, Ethan said, his voice cracking with guilt. I dragged you into the logistics. I showed you the files. If I had just stayed a quiet husband, you would still be safe in your tower. Lyra reached out, covering his hand on the throttle. I would be safe, Lyra said softly, and I would be asleep. You woke me up. Ethan. She looked at him with a fierce, terrifying love. I would rather lose a throne than lose myself, and I would rather die free with you than live as a puppet without you. Ethan looked at her. The fear in his chest didn't vanish, but it changed. It became fuel. Then let's go make a scene, he said. Are we partners? Lyra asked. Always, Ethan said. Partners, Mara yelled from the back. But also, can we please focus on the giant bomb? The Unity Summit was a sea of polite applause. The Grand Chancellor of the human bloc was speaking about the necessity of security and the dangers of alien radicalism. Suddenly, the massive holographic screens behind the podium flickered. The Chancellor's face was replaced by a live feed of a very disheveled, very pink-haired woman. Mic check, 1, 2. Mara's face said to billions of viewers. Sorry to interrupt the nap time, but you folks are about to be exploded. Gasps rippled through the assembly hall. Security guards reached for their earpieces, confused. The feed split. On one side was Mara. On the other was a scrolling list of financial transactions. That ship approaching your station? It is not Drakari separatists. It was purchased by shell company Alpha 9. Guess who owns Alpha 9? The screen highlighted a name, Aurelian Syndicate, and guess who signed the authorization for the attack? A document appeared. It bore the digital signature of the Grand Chancellor's own aide. The room erupted into chaos. In the space above, the courier ship screamed toward the station. I need a connection, Lyra shouted. Get me close to the command node. I am trying, Ethan yelled. The freighter is 30 seconds from impact. Lyra jacked her interface directly into the ship's computer. She reached out with her mind, accessing the ancient Drakari command codes that were built into the station's foundational architecture. Codes that predated human occupation. She slammed past the firewalls. She seized control of the station's point defense cannons. Override, she screamed. On the station's hull, the massive defense turrets, which had been powered down by the conspirators, suddenly spun to life. They didn't aim at the courier ship. They aimed at the freighter. Fire, Lyra commanded. The turrets unleashed a barrage of plasma. The freighter, just a mile from the station, detonated. A miniature sun blossomed in the void. The shockwave hit the station, shattering windows and knocking delegates to the floor. But the hull held. The explosion had happened safely outside the kill zone. Inside the assembly hall, the feed changed again. Lyra Veyron appeared. She was not standing at a podium. She was strapped into a cockpit, her hair wild, soot streaking her face, her eyes burning gold. Beside her sat a human man, equally battered, delegates of the council. Lyra's voice thundered through the hall. Citizens of the galaxy, I am Lyra Veyron. The room went deathly silent. You were told that my people are your enemy. You were told that we must be controlled, chained, and integrated for your safety. You were told that my marriage to this man, she gestured to Ethan, was a symbol of your dominance, a purchase. Lyra looked directly into the camera. It is true. I paid for a human spouse. The crowd murmured. I paid for a contract, Lyra continued, her voice gaining strength. I bought a signature. I bought legal status. But let me be very clear. She reached out and took Ethan's hand, lifting it into the frame. The price bought a deal. It did not buy a soul. And what we found, what we built, is not something you can legislate. She leaned forward. You tried to use fear to force unity. You tried to use lies to justify slavery. But you forgot one thing. A contract can be broken. A choice cannot. Ethan looked at the camera. The files are uploaded, he said, his voice calm and leveled. The syndicate ledgers, the Dragonfall protocols, the payments to Caliph and the Chancellor's office. It is all there. Read it. Lyra spoke the final words. Love cannot be legislated through fear, and neither can peace. The deal is off. The feed cut. The aftermath was not a ripple, it was a tidal wave. The evidence Ethan uploaded was irrefutable. Within minutes, the Aurelian Syndicate's stocks plummeted to zero. Security forces on the station, realizing they had been set up to die, turned on the conspirators. The Grand Chancellor was arrested at his podium, in the hangar of the Obsidian. Caliph watched the broadcast from her cell. She sat in silence, watching the empire she tried to save by selling it crumble into dust. Lyra and Ethan landed their courier ship at the station's primary dock. They did not come out with hands up. They walked out. They were met not by an execution squad, but by a wall of press and confused security who didn't know whether to arrest them or salute them. Mara walked out first, filming the whole thing. Smile. Lovebirds, she quipped. You are trending on every planet with a subspace connection. Lyra stopped at the bottom of the ramp. She looked at the crowd, then she looked at Ethan. Are you ready? She asked quietly. Ethan straightened his jacket. He looked at the chaos, the flashing lights, the shouting reporters. He took her hand. I am if you are. 3 days later. The council chamber was a different place. Half the seats were empty, their occupants under investigation or in custody. The air smelled of cleaning fluid and desperation. Lyra stood in the center of the floor. She wore formal robes again, but they were different, simpler, without the heavy ornamentation of the old ways. The interim speaker, a nervous Skrellian, looked down at her. Lady Veyron, he clicked, in light of the extraordinary revelations and your role in preventing the catastrophe. The council has voted. He gestured to a holographic document floating in the air. We are offering you a mandate, a full security directorship over the Drakari sector and the human trade routes. Absolute authority to reorganize the defense grid and purge the syndicate remnants. Ethan stood in the viewing gallery, watching. It was almost absolute power. It was exactly what Caliph had wanted, but handed to Lyra on a silver platter. Lyra looked at the mandate. It would make her a queen in all but name. She could protect her people. She could ensure no one ever threatened them again. All she had to do was say yes. She looked up at the gallery. She met Ethan's eyes. She remembered Caliph's words. Power justifies sacrifice. Lyra turned back to the speaker. I decline, she said. The chamber erupted in whispers. The speaker blinked. Decline? And we are giving you everything you fought for. No, Lyra said. You are giving me a crown. I do not want a crown. I want a coalition. She waved a hand, dismissing the hologram. I will not replace one tyranny with another. I propose a transparent coalition government with shared oversight. Drakari, human, and every other species. We will rebuild the defense grid together. No absolute mandates, no secret deals. But that will take years to negotiate, the speaker protested. It will be messy. Efficient governance gave us the syndicate. Lyra cut him off. I am not interested in efficiency. I am interested in consent. She turned and walked out of the chamber. Ethan met her in the corridor. It was the same corridor where they had first walked as a fake couple, stiff and terrified. You turned down the job, Ethan said, falling into step beside her. It was a bad contract, Lyra said, a small smile playing on her lips. I have become very particular about the contracts I sign. They walked out onto the balcony overlooking the Capitol. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city that was slowly putting itself back together. So, Ethan said, leaning against the railing, the marriage contract. Lyra went still. Technically, under the emergency clauses, it is voidable now. The crisis is over. You are free to go. You have your money. You have your immunity. Ethan looked at the horizon. I do, he said. Lyra looked down at her hands. I will not hold you to it. Ethan, I told you. I will not be a jailer. Ethan turned to face her. I was reading the fine print. He said, there is a renewal clause. Lyra looked up. What? Clause 99. Ethan improvised. The happily ever after addendum. It says that if the parties survive an apocalypse, a government overthrow, and a viral media scandal, they have the option to renegotiate the terms from transactional to permanent partnership. Lyra stared at him. Her heart hammered against her ribs louder than any drum. And what are the terms of this new contract? She whispered. Ethan stepped closer. Mutual respect, he said. No secrets. And I get to pick the dinner movie at least once a week. Lyra laughed. It was that same bright, chime-like sound that had startled him in the tailor shop. That is a steep price. Human. Ethan smiled. He reached out and took her face in his hands. I am told I am worth it. Lyra leaned into him. She closed the distance, not for the cameras, not for the voters, but for herself. When they kissed, it wasn't desperate, it wasn't hasty. It was slow, deliberate, and absolute. It was the seal on a bond that no lawyer could have drafted. Lyra pulled back, breathless, her forehead resting against his. You are worth it, she whispered. She looked out at the city, then back at him. Come, husband, she said, taking his hand. We have a lot of work to do. Ethan squeezed her hand. After you, partner. They walked back inside together, leaving the sunset behind them, ready to build something new. It had started as a purchase. It had ended as a partnership. And Lyra knew, with a certainty deeper than bone, that it was indeed more than just a simple deal. The silence that followed the Unity Summit was louder than the explosion had been. It was the silence of a vacuum being filled, the rushing sound of a galaxy taking a collective breath before plunging into the unknown. 3 weeks had passed since Lyra Veyron and Ethan Cole had stood before the cameras and dismantled a conspiracy that spanned a dozen star systems. In that time, the Aurelian Syndicate had not just fallen, it had shattered. Its assets were frozen by the Interstellar Bank, its fleets grounded, and its executives were scattered like dust in a solar wind, hunted by the very security forces they had once bribed. But victory, Lyra was learning, was a messy business. She sat in her office in the embassy, the room piled high with physical data slates because no one trusted the digital networks anymore. The air smelled of stale coffee and ozone. Lady Veyron, said Councillor Harth, a stern Drakari from the conservative wing who had surprisingly survived the purge. The optics are becoming complicated. He gestured to a holographic display hovering above her desk. It showed a poll from the core worlds. Your approval rating is 85%, Harth admitted, his tail twitching with begrudging respect. You are the savior of the summit, but there is a growing faction within the high houses that is demanding clarity regarding your domestic arrangement. Lyra looked up, her golden eyes sharp. Clarity? They argue that the marriage was a tactical necessity, Harth said smoothly. A brilliant maneuver to expose the syndicate. Now that the enemy is defeated, they expect you to annul the contract. Annul it, Lyra repeated, her voice flat. It would prove your moral purity. Harth pressed. It would show that you are not beholden to human influence. Conversely, the human bloc is pressuring you to elevate Mr. Cole to a permanent consort position. They want him to have a seat on the council. They want to use him as a lever to pry open Drakari trade routes. Lyra leaned back in her chair. The leather creaked. So, she said, one side wants me to discard him like a used weapon to prove I am strong. The other side wants me to wear him like a badge of office to prove I am compliant. It is politics. My lady, Harth said with a shrug. Symbols are useful only as long as they are simple. A temporary husband is a strategy. A permanent one is a liability. Lyra stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city of High Terra was rebuilding. She could see the repair drones weaving lights around the damaged spires. Get out, Harth, the counselor blinked. My lady? I said get out and take your poles with you. Ethan Cole was in the embassy gardens, a small sanctuary of bioluminescent flora that Lyra had imported from her homeworld. He was stripping the dead leaves off a fire fern, his movements mechanical. He felt the change in the air. The way the guards looked at him had shifted. Before, he was the curiosity, the pet. Now, he was the unknown variable. He was the man who had hacked the flagship, the man who knew where the bodies were buried. He heard the soft click of boot heels on the stone path. He didn't turn. You told Harth to leave, Ethan said. I heard him grumbling in the hallway about ungrateful hatchlings. He wanted me to divorce you, Lyra said, stopping beside him, to restore my honor. And the humans want you to promote me, Ethan added, snapping a dry stem. To secure their profits. He finally looked at her. She looked exhausted, her scales dull under the artificial skylight. She was wearing her armor again, not the physical plating, but the emotional barrier she put up when the world tried to eat her. I feel like a piece of furniture that everyone has an opinion on, Ethan said quietly. Put me in the corner, throw me out, upholster me in gold. Nobody is asking the chair what it wants. Lyra reached out, her hand hovering near his arm before she pulled it back. The cameras were gone, but the ghost of them lingered. What does the chair want? She asked. Ethan sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. I want to know if we are still pretending. Lyra, the crisis is over. The adrenaline is gone. Now it is just Tuesday, and I am living in your house, spending your money, and wondering if I am your partner or your project. Lyra looked stung. Project? You heard Harth? I am a liability, or a tool. Ethan. Lyra stepped closer, invading his personal space with a deliberate slowness. She took the rag from his hand and tossed it onto the bench. She took his hands in hers. Her skin was cool, grounding. Do you remember what I told you on the ship? She asked. I would rather lose a throne than lose myself. She looked up at him, her vertical pupils widening. You are not a tool. You are the only person in this entire galaxy who looks at me and sees Lyra, not the high diplomat. If I annul this contract, I am not proving my purity. I am cutting out my own heart to please a crowd of strangers. Ethan searched her face. He saw the fierce, terrifying honesty there. "But what are we?" he asked. "If we aren't a political stunt?" Lyra guided his hand to her waist, stepping in until their bodies brushed. "We are two people who survived a war," she whispered. "And now, we have to survive the peace." She leaned her forehead against his chin. "I do not want to own you, Ethan. Possession is for things. It is static. It is safe. I do not want safe. I want devotion." "Devotion?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "Devotion is a choice you make every morning," Lyra said. "It is waking up and deciding, again and again, that this is where you belong. I cannot force you to stay. The emergency clauses are lifted. You can walk out that gate right now." She pulled back enough to look him in the eye. "But I am asking you not to." Ethan looked at the gate. It was open. He had 10 million credits in a secure account, his severance pay from the job. He could go anywhere. He looked back at Lyra, at the woman who had jumped off a cliff to catch him. "I think," Ethan said slowly, a smile touching his lips, "that I would miss the arguments." Lyra let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. "Just the arguments? And the way you look when you threaten to throw me into a volcano," Ethan teased. "It is very attractive." Lyra laughed, and the sound broke the tension in the garden. She pulled him down into a kiss that tasted of relief and promise. It wasn't the chaste, performative kiss of the gala. It was deep, hungry, and entirely theirs. There was no audience. There was just the heat of her scales against his skin and the unspoken agreement that whatever came next, they would face it together. The romantic silence was shattered by a loud crash from the hedge maze. "Oops!" a voice yelled. "That was a load-bearing shrub." Mara Tenz emerged from the foliage, shaking leaves out of her pink hair. She was holding a data pad that was blinking rapidly. "I hate to interrupt the moment, truly," Mara said, stepping onto the path. "I was going to frame it for the documentary. The Dragon Bride Who Outlawyered the Galaxy, a love story in zero-G. Catchy, right? I am thinking of getting a narrator with a really deep voice." Lyra pulled away from Ethan, though she kept her arm linked with his. "Mara," Lyra said, eyebrows raised. "How did you get past the perimeter guards?" "I told them I was your spiritual advisor," Mara said with a grin. "And then I hacked the gate. Anyway, not important. This is important." She shoved the data pad between them. "I was scrubbing the Syndicate's old servers, you know, looking for bloopers for the special edition. And I found a ghost signal. It is a handshake protocol, an automated ping coming from a facility that isn't on any map." Ethan took the pad. He scanned the data, his logistical brain shifting into gear. "The encryption matches the Dragonfall project," Ethan said, his face darkening. "But the location. This is the moon of Ethelgard. That sector is supposed to be uninhabited." "Supposed to be," Mara corrected, "but this signal is a biomonitor relay. It is transmitting vital signs." Lyra went still. "Vital signs? Hundreds of them," Mara said grimly. "Mixed species, human and Drakari." Lyra took the pad. Her hands shook slightly. "The survivors?" she whispered. "The ones they took from the colonies. We thought they were dead. We thought the Ignis Prime lab was the only one." "It is a containment facility," Ethan said, reading the specs. "It is still running on automated lockdown. If the Syndicate is gone, no one is feeding them. No one is maintaining the atmosphere scrubbers." "They are trapped," Lyra realized, "and they are running out of time." She looked at Ethan. The piece was over. Tuesday was canceled. "We have to go," she said. "I will prep the ship," Ethan said, already moving. "No," Lyra said sharply. "Not just us. Not this time." She turned to the embassy tower. her eyes burning with a new kind of fire. The syndicate operated in the shadows. We defeated them in the light. If we are going to save these people, we are going to do it the right way. We are not going to be vigilantes. We are going to be a coalition. The hangar bay of the embassy was usually a quiet place. Today, it was a staging ground. Lyra stood on a crate, addressing the room. In front of her were 50 people. They were not soldiers. They were not an elite guard. Half of them were Drakari, young reformers, old traditionalists who had been shamed by Calith's betrayal, and pilots who wanted to clear their house's name. The other half were humans, dock workers who had seen the broadcast, colony refugees, even a few security contractors who had torn up their syndicate paychecks. "I cannot order you to do this," Lyra shouted, her voice echoing off the bulkheads. "I have no official mandate from the Council. This is not a sanctioned military operation. If you come with me, you are acting as private citizens. You will receive no pay. You will receive no medals." She looked at the faces in the crowd. But there are 300 souls trapped in a dark room on a cold moon, waiting for death. They are Drakari. They are human. They were stolen from us to build a weapon of hate. Lyra stepped down from the crate and walked through the crowd. She stopped in front of a human mechanic who was clutching a heavy wrench. "I am going to get them back," Lyra said. "Not as a diplomat, not as a highborn, but as a neighbor." She turned to the group. "Who is with me?" There was a moment of silence. Then, a massive Drakari warrior slammed his fist against his chest plating. "For the blood!" he roared. "For the neighbors!" the human mechanic shouted. The room erupted in cheers. Ethan stood by the airlock, watching Lyra command the room not with fear, but with shared purpose. He smiled. She wasn't just a leader anymore. She was a movement. The rescue mission on Ethelgard was surgical. The facility was buried under a glacier, a frozen tomb of durasteel and ice. The Coalition fleet, a ragtag collection of yachts, cargo haulers, and Lyra's courier ship, descended through the blizzard. Ethan coordinated the ground team. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he knew how to move people. Team Alpha, secure the generator. Team Beta, blow the airlock. The volunteers moved with a chaotic but effective energy. Drakari used their brute strength to clear ice falls, while human technicians bypassed the electronic locks. They weren't a trained army, but they looked out for each other. When a human slipped on the ice, a Drakari caught him. When a Drakari's heat pack failed, a human offered their spare thermal cloak. They breached the central lab. It was a house of horrors. Rows of stasis tanks lined the walls. But as Mara had predicted, the power was failing. The tanks were flashing red. Lyra ran to the main console. "The release sequence is locked," she yelled. "If we force it, the shock could kill them." Ethan slid across the floor to join her. "Let me see." He plugged in his interface. "It is a logistical failsafe. It is waiting for an authorization code from a syndicate executive. We don't have one." Lyra cried. Ethan looked at the code architecture. "No. But we have the ledger." He pulled up the massive file of financial crimes they had stolen. "This system is built on greed. Lyra, it prioritizes asset protection. If I flag these tanks as seized assets under the Interstellar Banking Act using the frozen syndicate accounts," he typed furiously. The computer chimed. "Transfer authorized." The locks on the tanks hissed open. "Get them out!" Lyra screamed. The Coalition members rushed forward. They pulled emaciated figures from the gel. There were tears. There were reunions. A Drakari volunteer found his missing sister. A human father found his son. Lyra stood in the center of the chaos, watching the walls of division crumble. A human woman was weeping, holding a Drakari child who was shivering with cold. This, Lyra thought, this is the real weapon. This is what they were afraid of. Not dragonfire, not super soldiers, empathy. The return to High Terra was not a quiet affair. The fleet arrived in formation, carrying the survivors. The media was waiting. But this time, Lyra didn't hide. She stood on the landing pad, flanked by the volunteers. The rescued captives stood behind her, a living testament to the Syndicate's cruelty and the Coalition's courage. The interim speaker of the council met them on the tarmac. He looked pale. Lady Veyron. He stammered. This is unauthorized. You invaded a sovereign moon. I conducted a rescue operation that the council was too slow to authorize, Lyra said. Her voice amplified for the cameras. The speaker swallowed. The council has convened. In light of this, victory, the offer stands, the mandate. You can have the supreme command. You can ensure this never happens again. Lyra looked at the document he offered. It was absolute power. It was safety. She took the document. She looked at it. Then she tore it in half. The silence was absolute. I do not want your mandate, Lyra said, her voice ringing clear. I do not want to be the jailer of the peace. She pointed to the volunteers behind her, human and Drakari, standing shoulder to shoulder. Look at them. They did not fight because they were ordered to. They fought because they chose to. That is the only security that matters. I propose a new governing body, Lyra announced. A coalition of conscience, shared leadership, rotating seats, transparency in all things. But, the speaker sputtered, that will be chaotic. It will be difficult. Yes, Lyra smiled, and for the first time, she looked truly happy. It will be very difficult. Freedom usually is, but we will figure it out, together. That evening, the council chamber was empty save for two people. Lyra and Ethan stood in the center of the vast circular room. The seats were empty, waiting for the new delegates to be elected. It is going to be a mess, Ethan said, looking up at the high ceiling. You know that, right? Democracy is mostly just people shouting at each other until they get hungry. I am counting on it, Lyra said. Shouting is better than shooting. She turned to him. The long day was done. The survivors were safe. The world was changing. But there was one piece of business left. Our contract, Lyra said. The 5-year term. Ethan nodded. Legally, we are still bound. Unless you want to file that annulment paperwork Hearth was so excited about. Lyra took a step closer. The sound of her boots was the only noise in the room. I have been reviewing the terms, she said. The clause about services rendered. I believe the debt is paid. Ethan watched her. You don't need a husband anymore. Lyra, you don't need a human shield. You are the most powerful woman in the galaxy. Lyra stopped in front of him. She reached up and adjusted the collar of his jacket. I don't need a shield, she agreed. Ethan took a deep breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, physical object. It wasn't a data drive and it wasn't a weapon. It was a ring. Simple, titanium, unadorned. Then I have a counter-proposal, he said. Lyra looked at the ring. When the contract ends, Ethan said, his voice steady. I want the option to renew, but not as an employee, not as a purchase. He took her hand. I want to stay as a partner. I want to argue with you about policy. I want to hold your hand when the cameras aren't looking. I want to be the one who knows that you are afraid of thunderstorms. He looked into her golden eyes. I am not asking for a deal. Lyra, I am asking for a home. Lyra looked at the ring, and then at him. Her eyes shone with tears she refused to shed. "You are a fool, Ethan Cole," she whispered. "You could have had freedom." "I found it," he said. Lyra took the ring from his hand. She didn't put it on immediately. She held it tight. "I will not beg you to stay," she said fiercely. "I will never beg, but I will fight to deserve you every single day. I will treat you as my equal, my conscience, and my heart." She slipped the ring onto her finger. It clicked against her scales. Proposal accepted. Ethan smiled, and it was the brightest thing in the room. "So," he said, "what now?" Lyra looked around the chamber, the place where laws were made, where wars were declared, where history was written. "Now," she said, "we go home, and then we rewrite the rules." She took his hand, and they walked toward the exit. The massive doors hissed open, revealing the lights of the city below. They stepped out together, not as a transaction, but as a team. What had begun as a cold calculation in a boardroom had survived fire, betrayal, and war to become something indestructible. Lyra looked at Ethan one last time before they stepped into the light. "It really was," she murmured, a smile touching her lips, "more than just a simple deal." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Best money you ever spent." And together, they walked into the future they had chosen.